I remember the night I discovered I had won the lottery as if it were tattooed into my skin. It was late, past midnight, and I was sitting alone in my small apartment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the silence. I wasn't even expecting anything, because buying tickets had always been more of a ritual than a real hope. I almost forgot I had played that week, but boredom made me check. When the numbers lit up on the screen, and they matched mine one by one, my chest tightened so hard I thought I might faint. My hands shook, my throat went dry, and my eyes darted back and forth between the paper ticket and the screen. It didn't feel real. It felt like a cruel dream I would wake up from any second. At first, I laughed. A nervous, hollow laugh that echoed in the quiet room. I kept checking, refreshing, reading and rereading until my vision blurred. Then, the reality hit me like a blow to the stomach. This was real. I wasn't the broke Lisa everyone pitied or ignored anymore. I was rich. But the strangest part was that the joy I expected never came. Instead, tears welled up in my eyes, not out of happiness, but because I thought of all the years of humiliation I had swallowed, all the times my cousin Ethan smirked when I couldn't afford something, all the times my Aunt Margaret sneered about the useless one in the family. Winning felt like justice, but justice always comes with a bitter taste when it's too late to erase the wounds. The ticket lay on the table like a ticking bomb, daring me to touch it, to accept the power it now gave me. I paced the room, clutching my chest, whispering to myself that it wasn't possible. My mind ran through 1,000 images of my life, hand-me-down clothes, skipped meals, nights working 2 jobs just to pay rent, the pitying eyes of strangers when I had to say, I can't afford it. Now, with a single slip of paper, all of that could change. And yet, I didn't feel like the person who deserved such fortune. I felt like a fraud, standing in borrowed shoes, waiting for someone to snatch the dream away. I sat down again, staring at the peeling paint of my kitchen walls, and thought of my mother. She had passed away years ago, but her words still lived in my memory. Lisa, never beg for their approval. One day, life will turn, and you'll see who truly stands by you. I wondered if this was the turn she spoke about. If she had been alive, she would have celebrated with me, not because of the money, but because it meant I no longer had to bow to anyone's cruelty. For a long moment I closed my eyes and imagined her hand in mine, whispering that I was free. It was the closest I came to peace that night. But then, another voice crept into my head, sharper, colder, Ethan's voice. I could hear him mocking me, telling me money wouldn't change what I was, the poor relative, the useless cousin, the one who always asks but never gives. His words had been my cage for years, and now, even with the keys in my hand, I couldn't step outside. I thought of Margaret, too, her raised eyebrow whenever I entered a room, her casual cruelty disguised as honesty. They had shaped me into someone small, someone who believed silence was safer than speaking. And now I had to decide, would I use this power to rise, or would I let their voices keep me chained? That night, I didn't call anyone. I didn't even allow myself to celebrate with a bottle of cheap wine in the fridge. I wrapped the ticket carefully in a plastic sleeve, tucked it into a book on my shelf, and sat there in the dark. It wasn't just about money. It was about control, about rewriting the script of my life, and I wasn't ready to share that script with people who had spent years tearing out my pages. I decided in that moment that silence would be my shield. I would keep my fortune hidden, at least until I understood what to do with it. The hours passed, but sleep never came. Instead, I wandered around the apartment, touching objects that had once felt heavy with shame. The threadbare couch, the scratched table, the patched-up curtains. For the first time, I looked at them differently, not as symbols of failure, but as monuments to survival. I had lived with almost nothing, and now I had everything. That gave me power Ethan and Margaret would never understand. They had been born with comfort, spoiled by abundance. They didn't know what it meant to starve, to beg, to fight invisible battles, and maybe that was my true wealth, the scars they never had to earn. By sunrise, I had made a promise to myself. I would not rush into spending, nor flaunt what I had gained. I would live as Lisa, the poor relative, until the right moment revealed itself, because deep down, I wanted to see their truth. I wanted to know who they were when they thought I had nothing. And if they turned their backs on me, as they always had, then I would know that my fortune was not meant to be shared. My secret would be my mirror, reflecting the hidden colors of those around me. When I finally opened the curtains, Letting the light in, the city looked different. Every sound, the clatter of buses, the chatter of early workers, seemed both distant and fragile. I wasn't one of them anymore, yet I still belonged among them. That paradox burned in my chest. I was a woman caught between two worlds, carrying a secret that could change everything, but also destroy everything. And for now, I chose silence, because silence, I realized, was louder than any announcement I could make. The days after the win blurred together like a strange dream, where everything looked the same, but felt irreversibly altered. I went to work at the bookstore as usual, straightening shelves and greeting customers with the same tired smile. None of them knew that beneath my simple cardigan and scuffed shoes, I was carrying a secret that could shatter every assumption they had about me. I noticed how invisible I was, how people passed by without a second glance, and it almost made me laugh. If they only knew I could buy the entire store, pay off every debt in the room, and still have more money than they'd see in their lifetime. But instead, I kept quiet, tucking the secret deeper into myself, letting it feed me in silence. At night, the silence grew heavier. I'd sit in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering who I could trust. Friends had drifted away years ago when I couldn't keep up with dinners or weekend trips. Family, though blood, had always been crueler than strangers. Ethan's laughter still echoed in my memory from last Christmas, when he'd handed me a $20 bill as a joke gift, saying it might finally buy me something decent. Everyone laughed. I had smiled through it, swallowing humiliation, but that night I cried alone. Remembering that moment now, with millions in my bank account, made my stomach churn. Wasn't it ironic that I could erase every insult with the flick of a pen? Yet I felt no satisfaction in the thought. I tried to live normally, but my mind never stopped racing. I made lists of what I could do: buy a house, travel the world, donate to causes that mattered. But I also made a second list: names of people I wanted to test, people whose loyalty I wanted to measure. Ethan's name was at the top. He had always been the golden boy, charming, well-dressed, adored by Margaret, and admired by everyone else. But I knew his other side. I had seen the way he looked at people when he thought they were beneath him, the disdain curling his lips. He had always thought I was beneath him, and now, for the first time, I held the power to turn that belief upside down. I rehearsed conversations in my head, playing out scenarios where I would reveal the truth. In some versions, he begged for forgiveness. In others, he seethed with envy. But then another thought would silence me. Why reveal it at all? The power was in not telling, in letting him underestimate me while I watched his arrogance crumble under the weight of his own pride. That idea lit a strange fire in me. I had been the weak one for so long, the poor cousin, the invisible Lisa. Perhaps staying silent was my greatest weapon. Perhaps I didn't need to prove anything at all. Just wait, watch, and see. Still, doubt crept in. What if keeping it secret made me paranoid, made me bitter? What if I was wasting time by hiding instead of living? I had always been cautious, always the one to step aside, to avoid conflict. But now I felt a dangerous hunger to confront, to expose, to push back against years of belittlement. The ticket had not just given me wealth, it had given me a choice I never had before. And choices are dangerous things when you've lived too long without them. I began to realize that I was no longer afraid of Ethan or Margaret. What I feared most was myself, the version of me that was emerging from the shadows. One evening, Margaret invited me over for dinner, a rare occurrence. I almost didn't go, but curiosity tugged me forward. Her house was polished, as always, filled with expensive furniture that screamed wealth but felt cold. At the table, Ethan smirked when he saw me, as if he could still smell poverty clinging to my skin. Margaret asked polite questions, thinly veiled with judgment, about my job, my rent, my plans for the future. I smiled, answered softly, and watched them both. They had no idea that the balance of power in the room had shifted. They still saw me as small, but inside, I was roaring. That night, walking home in the cool air, I knew what I had to do. I would not reveal my secret, not yet. Instead, I would play the role they expected. I would be Lisa, the one in need, the one they dismissed, and when the moment came, I would ask for help, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see their true faces when they thought I had nothing to give back. It would be my test, my quiet revenge, and my way of measuring whether blood ties meant anything at all. By the time I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I felt strangely light. I had a plan, and plans gave me purpose. The money was mine, secure, untouchable. But the truth about the people around me, that was still to be discovered. And so, with the city buzzing outside my window, I whispered to myself a promise. They'll show me who they really are. And when they do, I'll never forget. The morning I decided to set my plan in motion, I woke up with a strange calmness, as if the decision had been waiting for me all along. I made coffee in my chipped mug, the one Ethan once mocked, saying, "No wonder you're still single, Lisa. Your life looks like a thrift shop." I remembered how I had laughed weakly back then, swallowing my embarrassment. But today, that memory tasted different. Stronger, bitter, yes, but empowering too. The plan was simple. I would ask Ethan for help, just a small loan, something insignificant compared to what I truly had. He would believe he held the power, that I was crawling to him like always, and that was exactly what I wanted. All day at the bookstore, I rehearsed the words in my head. How much should I ask for? Too much, and he'd get suspicious. Too little, and he might toss it at me without a thought. I wanted him to squirm, to hesitate, to show me that disdain I knew so well. I imagined his smirk, his eye roll, the way his jaw tightened when he felt superior. I wanted to see it again, but this time through a different lens, because this time, I'd be the one truly in control. And maybe, just maybe, his response would confirm everything I had always suspected, that to him, I was nothing more than a burden. That evening, I dialed his number, my hands trembling despite myself. He answered with that careless tone, as though even speaking to me was an inconvenience. "Lisa, what's wrong now?" he said, not even bothering to hide his impatience. I almost laughed at how predictable he was, how little he tried to mask his contempt. But I steadied my voice, pretending vulnerability. I told him things were tight, that an unexpected expense had come up, and that I could use a little help. I held my breath, waiting for the moment. There was silence on the line, followed by a sigh so heavy I could almost see him rolling his eyes. "Lisa," he said slowly, like a teacher scolding a child, "you're useless. Always asking for something. Always needing. When are you going to stand on your own 2 feet?" The words hit me like glass, sharp and cutting, but I refused to let them show. Instead, I whispered thank you for listening, and before he could say anything else, I hung up. My heart was pounding, not from shame, but from the rush of victory. He had failed the test exactly as I knew he would. I sat there in my small apartment, staring at the silent phone, my lips curving into a smile I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't joy, it was clarity. Ethan had revealed himself with no hesitation, no mask. To him, I would always be the struggling cousin, the one who couldn't measure up. He didn't know about the millions tucked safely away, or the power that now pulsed in my veins. And that ignorance was my weapon. The silence of my secret was louder than any insult he could throw at me. Still, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Sadness. A small, painful ache that even winning the lottery couldn't erase. For all his cruelty, Ethan was family, and part of me had hoped, naively, that he would surprise me, that maybe beneath the arrogance, there was kindness, a sliver of love. But now I saw it clearly. There was nothing there, just disdain, polished with charm, dressed up in expensive suits and empty laughter. It hurt to admit it, but the truth often does. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into the distance. I thought about how easily people reveal themselves when they believe no one is watching closely. Ethan had shown me his soul in a single phone call, and it was darker than I wanted to believe. Margaret, I knew, would be no different. She had always chosen Ethan's side, always favored him, always reminded me of my shortcomings. Perhaps it was time to test her too, to see whether she carried the same poison in her heart. By the time the bottle was half empty, my plan had grown. It wouldn't stop with Ethan. No, I would test them all. Every person who had ever belittled me, laughed at me, or turned their back when I needed them. My secret would be my shield, and their reactions would be their confessions. One by one, I would discover the truth. And when I finally chose to reveal what I had, it would not be to beg for acceptance. It would be to show them that the Lisa they dismissed so easily was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone they could never control again. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's smirk, Margaret's tilted chin, and heard the echo of their voices dismissing me as though I were a stain they couldn't scrub out. The bitterness gnawed at me, But beneath it all, something stronger pushed forward. A hunger to remember why I had once believed their opinions mattered so much. That answer, I knew, lay buried in the years behind me, in the girl I once was, the girl who had been taught to think small, to be grateful for scraps, to accept invisibility as her place in the family. And so, like someone peeling back a bandage, I let my memories bleed through. I thought of my childhood, the way I would linger at the edges of the playground, while Ethan strutted in the center, surrounded by friends who laughed at his every joke. Margaret would sit on the bench with the other mothers, watching proudly, her eyes never once straying toward me. My mother, sweet but tired, always seemed apologetic, as if my mere presence was an inconvenience to the world. It didn't take long for me to learn silence, to hide in books and shadows, to believe that if no one noticed me, at least they couldn't laugh at me. But I noticed them. Every smile Ethan received, every nod of approval Margaret bestowed. That pattern followed us into adulthood. Family dinners were always the same. Ethan's accomplishments announced like headlines, Margaret's applause filling the room, and me left to scrape for recognition. Even when I brought home good grades, landed jobs, or worked double shifts to stay afloat, it was never enough. Margaret's compliments were like currency she refused to spend on me. She saved them for Ethan, investing in him as though he were the only stock worth believing in. I became invisible ink in the story of my own family, and yet, somewhere deep inside, I still hoped that one day I would prove myself, that I'd earn a seat at the table, not at its corner. The lottery win had been a cruel paradox. The moment I saw those numbers align, I felt both victorious and terrified. Victorious, because suddenly I held in my hands more power than Ethan or Margaret could imagine. Terrified, because I knew the temptation would be to wave it in their faces, to demand their respect, to scream, "Look at me now." But respect gained through money is counterfeit, fragile, and temporary. I wanted something real, something undeniable. That was why I had tested them with nothing more than a simple plea, a small loan, an opportunity for kindness, and both had failed. Still, as I sat with those memories, I realized this wasn't only about them. It was about me, the girl who once begged for validation, who had spent years contorting herself to fit the mold they carved out. That girl deserved justice too. She deserved to finally see that the people who rejected her were not worth her tears. But knowing it in theory and feeling it in my bones were two very different things. I wanted proof. I wanted a moment so sharp, so irreversible, that it would sever the last thread tying me to their approval. I began to imagine scenarios. What if I invited them all to dinner at a fancy restaurant, paid for the entire meal, and then revealed I was the one footing the bill? What if I bought a house bigger than Margaret's and invited the entire family to a grand celebration? What if I casually forgot my wallet one evening, let Ethan cover my bill, and then later gifted him a check that made his contribution look like spare change? My mind raced with possibilities, each one flashing like fireworks, tempting me with satisfaction. But satisfaction wasn't enough. I wanted impact. The truth was, I didn't want them to grovel or apologize. I wanted them to see the person they had underestimated, belittled, dismissed. I wanted them to confront their cruelty, to choke on the taste of their own arrogance. And deep down, I knew the reveal had to be precise, almost surgical. One wrong move, and I'd look like the bitter cousin waving her wealth around. But if I timed it right, if I controlled the stage, it would be unforgettable. It would pierce their pride in a way no amount of denial could erase. By the time dawn broke, the outline of a plan had formed in my head. It wasn't fully shaped yet, but the bones were there. A family gathering, everyone present, no excuses. A stage where I had once been invisible, now waiting for my transformation. The thought alone steadied me. For once, I wasn't the girl at the corner of the table. I was the one holding the script. And soon, when the curtain rose, they would learn who I truly was. The morning after my restless night, I stood at the kitchen counter with a steaming cup of coffee and a notebook open before me. The pages filled quickly with messy scribbles, names, dates, restaurants, even seating arrangements. If I was going to do this, it couldn't be half-hearted. It had to be an event they'd never forget, a gathering that appeared ordinary, but held a secret thunderstorm waiting to break. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what I was planning. For years, I had dreamed of being seen, and now the opportunity was within my grasp. I started with the guest list. It had to include Ethan, of course, and Margaret. Neither could be absent if the reveal was to land. But then I thought of the others. My Aunt Claire, my Uncle George, cousins scattered across the city. They had all played small parts in making me feel like an outsider. Maybe they hadn't been as cruel, but they hadn't stood up for me either. Their silence had hurt almost as much as the insults. And if I was going to peel away the mask, I wanted every one of them to witness it. Not for vengeance, I told myself, but for truth. Choosing the location was harder. A restaurant felt too public, too chaotic. The noise could drown out the moment. My home was out of the question. I wasn't ready for them to step into the sanctuary I'd built with my winnings. Then, almost by instinct, I thought of the old banquet hall where the family used to gather for birthdays when we were children. A large, elegant room with chandeliers and long tables, it carried memories of laughter that had never belonged to me. What better place to reclaim than the very ground where I had once been invisible? With every decision, excitement twisted with dread. I couldn't stop asking myself, was this petty? Was I becoming the person I despised, using wealth to make a point? But every time doubt tried to take hold, I remembered the way Ethan's eyes had looked down on me, the way Margaret's voice had cut like a blade. I remembered the young girl who had sat silently in that banquet hall while others spoke over her, as if she were just furniture in the room. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about balance, about finally tipping the scales that had been crooked my entire life. Money made everything easier, almost unnervingly so. With a single phone call, I reserved the hall. With another, I arranged catering, the kind of exquisite dishes Margaret always bragged about tasting when she traveled abroad. Fine wines, delicate desserts, a menu designed to impress even the hardest critic. My credit card slid across counters without hesitation, and yet each swipe brought with it a pang of guilt. I remembered the times I had skipped meals to pay rent, the months I had counted coins at the grocery store. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now orchestrating luxury for the very people who had dismissed me. Still, I wasn't foolish. This couldn't just be about food and spectacle. The reveal had to be timed, deliberate, and devastating in its simplicity. I envisioned it. Everyone eating, drinking, their guard down. Conversations flowing, laughter echoing against the chandeliered ceiling. And then, at the perfect moment, I would stand, glass in hand, and tell them the truth. Not with gloating or malice, but with calm certainty. A confession that would silence the room and force their eyes to see me. Not the version they had painted, but the reality standing before them. The hardest part was what came after. What would happen once the truth was out? Would they scramble to apologize? To suddenly embrace me with false warmth? Would they grow cold and resentful? Angry that I had kept such a secret? Part of me longed for their shame, but another part feared their reactions. What if they tried to use me, to sink their claws into my fortune? What if this entire plan backfired, and instead of freedom, I found myself trapped in a new web of manipulation? The questions circled my mind like vultures, but I knew one thing with clarity. I couldn't turn back now. As the day of the gathering drew closer, I rehearsed the words I might say. In front of the mirror, I practiced my smile, my tone, the pauses that would make the silence stretch just enough to sting. Sometimes I almost convinced myself this wasn't about revenge at all. It was about liberation, about letting the truth breathe after being suffocated for too long. And in those moments, staring at my own reflection, I caught a glimpse of something unexpected. Strength. Not the strength of money, but the strength of finally choosing my own narrative. Whatever happened at that banquet hall, I knew my life would never be the same. The night arrived cloaked in a crisp chill, the kind that made the city lights shimmer a little brighter. I arrived at the banquet hall an hour early, the weight of the moment pressing down on me like a heavy cloak. The chandeliers had already been lit, their golden glow spilling over the polished wooden floors and white linen tables. Every plate gleamed, every glass sparkled as though mocking the emptiness inside me. I walked between the tables, touching the chairs lightly, as though steadying myself on the bones of a memory I was about to shatter. My pulse beat furiously in my neck, reminding me that there was no going back. The first to arrive was Aunt Claire, her perfume flooding the room before her voice did. She hugged me stiffly, the kind of embrace that said more about manners than affection. Behind her came Uncle George, who commented on the food before even looking at me. Their indifference no longer surprised me, but it still stung like salt in a wound. I smiled, playing the gracious host, all while my stomach tightened with anticipation. They didn't suspect a thing. To them, I was just Lisa, the cousin who never quite measured up, the one who had to beg for help to get by. Soon, more relatives trickled in, filling the room with chatter. The air thickened with laughter, glasses clinking, and the soft music I had arranged in the background. I studied them quietly, each face etched with years of dismissal and arrogance. Margaret entered last, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome announcing her importance. Her dress was sharp, her smile sharper. She kissed my cheek as though she were doing me a favor. Ethan followed a step behind her, his smirk firmly in place, the same one he'd worn when he had called me useless. Just seeing him there sent a cold rush through me, but I kept my composure. This was exactly where I wanted him. As dinner began, conversations flowed easily. They boasted about jobs, vacations, new cars, every detail dripping with pride. I let them speak, offering nods and polite chuckles, though my mind was far from their empty words. Each bite of food was just a countdown to the moment I had rehearsed in front of my mirror. My glass of wine sat untouched, my fingers circling its rim in slow, steady movements. I wasn't hungry. I was waiting for the silence, for the pause in their noise when my voice would finally rise above it. Margaret, ever the self-appointed queen, lifted her glass and began to toast to family. The irony almost made me laugh. She praised unity, tradition, and loyalty, words she had never lived by when it came to me. Her voice carried over the table like it always did, commanding attention without earning it. As she spoke, I felt my heart harden. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about every moment of exclusion, every smirk, every whispered comment about my failures. My turn was coming, and it would burn brighter than her hollow toast. Ethan, emboldened by wine, leaned back in his chair and made a jab about some people always living off the kindness of others. His eyes flicked toward me with the same condescension that had cut me years before. The table erupted in shallow laughter, and though my face remained calm, my hands tightened around the stem of my glass. That was it. The trigger I didn't know I'd been waiting for. The timing was perfect, almost as if fate had arranged it. The words I had prepared pressed at the edge of my lips, begging to be released. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. The sound silenced the table, and all eyes turned to me. My pulse thundered, but my voice, when it came, was steady, deliberate. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my gaze sweeping across their confused faces. "You've always seen me as the one who needed help, the one who couldn't stand on her own, and maybe you were comfortable keeping me in that role. But tonight, I'm here to show you just how wrong you've been." My words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. A flicker of unease crossed Margaret's face, though she masked it quickly. Ethan, still smirking, gestured for me to continue as if mocking my attempt to speak. The rest of the table shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but unwilling to name it. In that silence, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not hesitation, but power. For the first time in my life, I had their full attention, and I wasn't going to waste it. I stood there, feeling every heartbeat echo in my throat, my hands gripping the edges of my chair as though it anchored me to the floor. The silence that followed my opening words was heavy, filled with the kind of discomfort that only arises when the mirror of truth is lifted. I let my gaze sweep across them, studying each face, the forced smile of Aunt Claire, the furrowed brow of Uncle George, the wide-eyed curiosity of my younger cousins. But it was Ethan's smug expression, that half grin of mockery, that ignited the flame in my chest. He thought I was bluffing, that I was simply indulging in one of my little speeches that never led anywhere. They didn't realize that this night had been carefully planned down to every detail, every word sharpened like a blade meant to cut through years of condescension. For once, I wasn't going to swallow my pride or retreat into silence. I began slowly, my voice calm, though beneath it ran a current of controlled rage. "Do you remember all the times I came to you, not to beg, but to ask for the smallest ounce of support? A kind word, a loan when times were unbearably tough, or even just the respect you freely offered to each other but never to me?" I paused, watching as a few lowered their eyes to their plates, suddenly fascinated by their untouched food. Each time I was met with sighs, with rolling eyes, with words like useless and burden. I carried those labels, not because they were true, but because you forced them onto me, and I accepted them for years, thinking maybe you were right, maybe I was less than you. My throat tightened, but I pushed the emotion down, using it as fuel to drive the knife deeper into their collective guilt. Margaret shifted in her seat, lifting her glass again as if she could hide behind the act of drinking. "Lisa, darling," she interrupted with a tight smile. "You're being dramatic. Families argue, we all say things we don't mean. Don't take it so personally." Her words dripped with dismissal, and the falseness of her tone nearly made me laugh out loud. For years, she had diminished me with those very phrases, reducing my pain to melodrama. This time, I didn't let her get away with it. "No, Margaret," I said firmly, my voice slicing through her feigned composure. "This isn't drama. This is truth. You all built yourselves up by tearing me down, and you convinced yourselves I was too weak to ever rise above it." For the first time, I saw her falter, her smile slipping just enough to reveal the crack beneath. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his smirk widening as though he found amusement in my defiance. "So what's the point of this, Lisa? You want us to clap for you? Give you a medal for surviving with so little?" His voice was dripping with the same cruelty he had wielded when I asked him for help. The same day he had looked me dead in the eye and called me useless. The word echoed in my ears again, but now it no longer stung. It only fueled my determination. "No," I replied, locking eyes with him. "I don't want applause, and I certainly don't want pity. What I want is for each of you to see me for who I truly am. Not the Lisa you invented to feel superior to, but the Lisa who stopped needing you long ago." My voice rang steady, slicing through his laughter like steel through paper. The room had gone still. Even the clinking of cutlery had ceased, leaving only the hum of the chandeliers above and the faint throb of blood in my ears. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the leap I was about to take. "What none of you realize," I continued, my hands trembling slightly though I forced them still, "is that while you were mocking me, dismissing me, turning your backs on me, I was building a life none of you could even imagine. A life you never bothered to ask about, because you assumed you already knew the ending to my story. You thought I would always be the girl in need, the one dependent on scraps you weren't even generous enough to offer. But I learned long ago that sometimes the best way to rise is in silence, so that when you finally look up, the person you underestimated is already standing miles above you." The words flowed like fire, each sentence melting away years of humiliation. Uncle George cleared his throat nervously, muttering something about gratitude and family being complicated, but his voice lacked conviction. They could all feel it now, the shift in power, the tremor of something they had never expected from me. I could see it in their eyes. Confusion, unease, even fear. I let the tension grow, savoring it, because for the first time, I wasn't the one squirming in discomfort. "You've all built your identities around money, status, and pride," I said, my voice growing firmer with each word. "You assumed that because I didn't flaunt anything, I had nothing. But that was your mistake, not mine. And tonight, I'm going to show you just how wrong you've been." The gasps around the table were almost audible, though no one dared to interrupt me now. Margaret finally snapped, her tone sharp, defensive. "What are you implying, Lisa? That you're somehow better than us? That you've been hiding something all this time?" Her words trembled at the edges, and I knew I had struck the nerve I had been aiming for. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice just enough to force them to listen closely. "Better? No. Smarter? Perhaps. Luckier? Definitely. You see, I stopped asking for help not because I gave up, but because I didn't need it anymore. What I needed was to see who you really were when the roles were reversed. When I came to you with open hands and you slammed the door in my face." I let my eyes linger on Ethan, his grin faltering for the first time. A smile, calm, almost serene, spread across my face as I prepared to peel back the final layer. "So yes, Margaret, I've been hiding something. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because when fortune found me, I realized it wasn't just money that would change everything. It was knowledge. The knowledge of who truly stood by me, and who only saw me as worthless when I had nothing to offer. And tonight, I want you all to see yourselves clearly, just as I've seen you for years." My hand rested lightly on the velvet pouch beside my plate, its weight a reminder of the truth I had kept so carefully guarded. The air around us seemed to tighten, anticipation thickening until it was almost unbearable. The reveal was seconds away, and their world was about to tilt. The silence in the dining room stretched until it became unbearable, pressing against everyone's chests like a weight too heavy to ignore. I let the velvet pouch sit on the table, my fingers resting on it casually, as though it was nothing more than an accessory. But the truth inside was powerful enough to unravel their carefully constructed illusions. Ethan shifted in his seat, tapping his fingers against the wood, clearly impatient. "Well?" he finally scoffed, his voice dripping with mockery that now sounded forced, like a man clinging to the last shred of control. "What's in the little bag, Lisa? Some trinket you bought at a flea market? Are we supposed to be impressed?" The laughter that followed was hollow, too loud, and it cracked in the middle, betraying his unease. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, letting him stew in his arrogance, savoring the moment before I stripped him of it forever. I drew in a slow breath, meeting his eyes with a calm that unnerved him. "Do you remember the day I asked you for help, Ethan? I came to you humiliated, desperate, because I believed, foolishly, that blood meant something, that family meant loyalty. You didn't just say no. You laughed. You told me I was useless, that I would never make anything of myself, that people like me were born to fail." The words hung in the air like poison, each syllable a reminder of his cruelty. He smirked at first, then frowned as the weight of his own words resurfaced, undeniable and damning. "That day," I continued, my hand brushing lightly against the pouch, "I promised myself something. I promised I would never again place my dignity in the hands of people who delighted in breaking me. And more than that, I promised that if fortune ever touched me, I would let the truth scorch you with its light." Their eyes widened, darting to the pouch as though it might suddenly burst open. With deliberate slowness, I pulled the drawstrings and tipped the pouch, letting its contents spill onto the polished oak table. Gasps filled the room as thick, crisp stacks of bills slid out, bound neatly in paper bands, the green ink catching the light from the chandelier. A hush fell over them all, the only sound the soft flutter of the money, as it landed with a weight far heavier than its size. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her wineglass tipping slightly and staining the pristine white tablecloth. Uncle George muttered something under his breath, a prayer, or a curse. It was hard to tell, but it was Ethan's reaction I drank in like wine. His smirk evaporated, his eyes widening, then narrowing, his jaw tightening as though he was struggling to process what lay in front of him. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then shut it again, his arrogance crumbling piece by piece. "This," I said firmly, gesturing to the stacks of cash, "is not even a fraction of what I have. Not a sample, not a loan, not a dream. It's reality, my reality, the one none of you ever believed I could achieve." I let my words sink in, watching their faces shift from shock to disbelief to something closer to fear. For years you saw me as nothing. You defined me by what I lacked, and you never once imagined that I could hold more power, more security, more freedom than any of you. And yet, here we are. I allowed a small smile to curl at the corner of my lips. While you were busy tearing me down, I was quietly climbing higher, and I didn't need any of you to get there. The satisfaction of saying those words, after years of silence, felt like stepping into the sunlight after living underground. Ethan slammed his palm on the table suddenly, the noise making a few people flinch. "This doesn't prove anything," he barked, his voice cracking under the strain of his anger. "So you brought some cash. Maybe you stole it. Maybe you found it. Maybe you're lying, as always, trying to make yourself seem more than you are." His desperation was palpable, his words tumbling over one another in a clumsy attempt to regain the ground he had lost. But the room no longer believed him, not fully. I could see it in the way Margaret's eyes darted from the money to me, in the way Uncle George sat straighter, suddenly unsure of his place. They weren't siding with him anymore. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already growing roots. I didn't raise my voice, but my words cut deeper than his shouts ever could. "Do you know what the difference between us is, Ethan? You thought money was your shield, your weapon, the thing that placed you above me. But you never realized that money in the wrong hands is just paper. It's wasted on arrogance. In my hands it became possibility, freedom, and above all, power. Power to walk into this room tonight, look you in the eye, and know that I no longer have to fear you, or beg from you, or endure your mockery, because I hold everything you once thought made you superior, and more." The fire in my voice was undeniable, and for the first time in my life, I saw him shrink back, even if only slightly. The table was a tableau of disbelief. My younger cousins stared at me as though they were seeing a ghost, their mouths slightly open. Margaret was pale, her lipstick smudged against the rim of her glass, her composure unraveling thread by thread. Uncle George rubbed his temples as though a headache had bloomed suddenly in his skull. No one laughed now. No one dismissed me as dramatic. They were all trapped in the reality I had crafted so carefully, the reality that had grown from every tear I had shed, every humiliation I had endured, every ounce of resilience I had forged in silence. And in that silence, I let them sit, let them squirm, let them realize that the balance of power had shifted forever. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a quiet, steady tone that carried more weight than shouting ever could. So no, Ethan, I didn't steal this. I didn't stumble upon it. And I certainly didn't lie. What I built is mine, earned by hands that you all thought were too weak to hold anything of value. And this, I gestured again to the stacks of bills, gleaming like trophies on the table, is just the beginning of what you failed to see. You mocked me because I had nothing. But now that I have everything, the only question left is this: who among you will admit what you truly are? Parasites feeding on the belief that you were better than me. My words landed like blows, and the silence that followed was not one of shock anymore, but of dread. They understood finally that the world had shifted beneath their feet, and there was no going back. The room was heavy with tension, the kind of silence that pressed down so hard you could feel it in your chest. No one moved. No one breathed. Margaret clutched the edge of the table as though it were a lifeline, and Ethan's jaw was set so tight it looked like it could crack. The air smelled faintly of expensive wine and fear, and I allowed a slow, deliberate smile to spread across my face. "You've all seen it now," I said, my voice steady and clear, slicing through the panic like a sharpened blade. "You've seen what I've built, what I've earned, what you refused to believe I could achieve. And yet, I want you to understand that this isn't about punishment. It's about recognition, finally seeing the truth that has always been there, hidden beneath the assumptions you made about me." Margaret's hands trembled as she lifted her glass, her eyes wide with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Lisa," she whispered, her voice cracking, This is insane. You don't need to prove anything to us. We're family. But even as she spoke, I could see the fractures in her composure, the panic she had never felt when controlling others. Her carefully constructed world was dissolving, and nothing she said could hold it together. I leaned forward, my tone soft but impossible to ignore. "Family?" I repeated, letting the word linger. "If family meant anything, you wouldn't have treated me like an afterthought, like a shadow. Family wouldn't have laughed when I needed help. Family wouldn't have made me feel worthless." Each word cut deeper than any accusation I could have thrown blindly. Ethan's face flushed red, a mix of shame and fury battling behind his eyes. "You think this changes anything?" he spat, but the confidence in his voice was gone, replaced by uncertainty. "You've got money now, but that doesn't mean—" I interrupted him with a calmness that made him falter. "No, Ethan, it changes everything. Not because of the money, but because you can no longer define me by what I don't have. I am no longer your project, your shadow, or your object of ridicule. I am myself. And this," I gestured to the stacks of bills still arranged neatly on the table, "is proof, undeniable proof, that the one you called useless holds more power than you've ever dreamed of." His face fell, his smirk gone, and the first crack of panic appeared. I let the silence stretch, giving the weight of my words time to settle like snow over their pretense. Every eye was on me, each pair of gaze tinged with a dawning realization. They had underestimated me for decades. Then I moved to the pouch, lifting it deliberately so the light caught every crisp bill and made the illusion of infinity. And because I believe in truth over drama, I've decided that the family I truly choose to keep is the one I build myself. You. I looked around the table, letting my gaze rest on Margaret, Ethan, and the others in turn. Can either recognize that or continue to live in the shadow of your assumptions. The choice is yours, but I will not wait any longer for your approval. Margaret's lips pressed together, her knuckles white as she gripped her glass. "Lisa, you can't just—" she began, but I shook my head, cutting her off with the authority I had long denied myself. "No, I can, because this is my life, my fortune, my voice, and if it took hiding, if it took silence, if it took years of enduring your dismissals, then so be it. But now that I have control, I am taking the narrative into my own hands. I am not your poor, weak cousin anymore. I am the one who decides, and tonight, I've decided to step into my own power." The words trembled with emotion, yet rang with absolute clarity. Ethan's chair scraped back as he tried to regain composure, but his movements were clumsy, like a boy learning to walk in shoes too big for him. "This isn't fair," he muttered, but even he knew he had no ground left to stand on. The room was still, waiting for my next move, and I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. I could see the questions forming in their minds. How did she do it? How did we miss it all these years? What else is she capable of? And the answer was simple. Everything. I was capable of everything they had denied me, and now, finally, they had to face that truth. I gathered the money back into the pouch slowly, deliberately, the clinking of the bills, a quiet declaration of control. "Tonight isn't just about money," I said softly, letting my voice echo through the hall. "It's about respect. It's about recognition. And it's about proving to myself, long after you've all judged me, that I am worth more than your opinions ever allowed me to believe. So consider this a lesson, a revelation, and a warning. Never mistake silence for weakness." Every eye in the room was locked on me now, some filled with awe, some with anger, some with disbelief, but all of them knew one thing. Lisa had won. I placed the pouch gently back on the table and stood, the chandeliers casting long shadows across my confident figure. "And with that," I said, my smile softening just slightly, "I think I've said all that needs to be said. I will live my life on my terms. I will celebrate my fortune, my choices, and my freedom. And you," I looked directly at Ethan and Margaret, "will have to reconcile with the fact that the person you dismissed for so long is now untouchable. Good night." I walked toward the door, head held high, leaving behind the stunned faces of those who had underestimated me for far too long, and felt a rush of liberation that no fortune, no words, and no apology could ever replicate.